Hello guys and welcome back to my video. So in this video we are going to be building a user authentication with Node.js and Flutter. So we'll be making sure that we'll be implementing that on Flutter. So make sure that you know how to implement RESTful API and how to store even tokens, JSON web tokens on your device using Flutter secure storage. So without wasting much of the time, let's create a new folder. Let's just call it Node.js server. Okay, so in this folder I'm just going to open my terminal on this folder. If you're using Windows, you can use command prompt. So I'm just going to type in npm init. So this will create a package, a JSON package for our project, right? So you can just skip all these other things. For the author, you can just put your name. Yeah, everything is okay. Then we can type. Okay, so let's go on and open the folder using our text editor. As for me, I'm using Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's go to our projects. Okay, so this is the package, right? So let's open another window, or terminal window, because we need a few packages for us to work on this project, right? So what we need is we need Express, because we'll be using Express to create our server, right? Okay, we also need mongoose. Okay, I made a typo. Okay, let's change this to Express. We also need NodeMon. So NodeMon is a library that allows us to make sure that when we make changes to our server, there's no need for us to actually restart our server. It restarts it on its own, right? The other one that we need is JSON web token. Okay, so now that we have our modules, as you can see, now we have node modules, right? So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to create a few folders, right? So we need the models folder. We also need the controllers. So the controllers are the ones that they link the outer world with our server, right? And then we also need the middleware. We also need the middleware folder. Also, I made a typo. Let me just get rid of it. So let's just throw it. Okay, we have the middleware. I also have the routes folder. Okay, we also have the routes folder. Okay, like this. And then now what we need to do is let's create another file called server.js. So this is the default file for application, right? So what we just need to do is we need to create a constant variable express, which we are going to set to the express package that we just installed, right? And then we need to create another variable called app, which are going to set to this variable express here. All right. Now what we need to do is we also need mongoose. But since we are using MongoDB, mongoose allow us to connect to MongoDB, right? And it also allows us to create schemas, MongoDB schemas, right? Like this. Now what we need, let's just use mongoose.connect. Okay, if we just mongoose.connect. So we are going to connect to the database process.env.db. So I'm just going to create this env file in a moment, right? And then what we need to do is to make sure that if there is an error, right, make sure that if it's a success, right, we just need to show on the console that we are connected to the DB, connected to DB, right? Else what we just need to do is we need to just catch that error, and then we'll just display it on console so that we know that why is it our app is not connecting to the DB, right, like this, right? All right, so now what we are going to do, we are now going to use app, which is express.json, like this. Since our server, we are going to be consuming our API, RESTful API in Flutter using the JSON format. So we need to make sure that we tell our server that we are using the JSON format, right? The other thing that we need to make sure that the URL encoded, we need to make sure that extended is set to true. Extended is set to true, like this. Okay. Right. So once we are done with this, we need to make sure that we listen to our server. So if we are going to be consuming this API on our Flutter, we need to make sure that we'll be listening to this server on a port, right? So this port, I'm just going to create it inside the env file, which we are going to do next, right? So we are going to make sure that if this port is occupied, right, then we are going to use the port 6000, right? Then after that, we just need to console log, and then just make sure that you use backticks, okay? App running on. We just need to display it on a console that our app is running on port process.env.port, like this. Okay, so that's it for listening to API. Now what we need to do, right, is we need to make sure that we create the .env file. So inside our .env file, right, we just need a few things. We need the port. So we need to set the port to 4000, right? And then what we need the DB. So for the DB, this one, what I'm just going to do here, I'm just going to pull out my browser. So just make sure that you create a MongoDB account. If you have not created a MongoDB account, there are a ton of videos that can help you create a MongoDB database. I'll put those videos in the link description. Okay. So what I'm just going to do here is okay. Let's go back. We need to make sure that shell JavaScript MongoDB. Okay. So since we are using VS Code, right, I'm just going to copy this. And then I'm just going to paste it inside. Command V. Okay, so let's paste it inside. We need the database username. Okay, the username. So let's go back again to our MongoDB, and then go to database access. So inside database access, so I think it's either it's advanced or database. I think it's database access, right? Okay. Okay, so let's edit it. The password. So let's edit the password, auto-generate password. So let's copy the auto-generated password here. And then what we just need to do here is we need to paste it here. And then for the username, let's go again. Let's check. I think this is the username. Let's copy it. And then let's paste it here. All right. Since we are done with this, what we need to do is let's go into our package.json. If you go into our package.json, like right inside our scripts, I want you to go inside scripts, right? So inside our scripts, what we need to do is we need to write start, and then we are going to use our nodemon package, which is going to be nodemon. We are telling nodemon to start server.js. So the server.js is this file that we have created here, right? So if I run npm start, I think says that mongoose error says that it must be a string, so I think there must be something going on here. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is let me just copy this db URL here, and then let me just paste it there. So let's try to save it, and let's try to see if our server is going to restart. So npm start. Says that mongodb.connect, it must be a string. So let's check what happened. What did I do wrong? So db is equals to mongoose, mongodb. Everything is correct. What I think is wrong is the password. So let's go to okay, let's auto generate this password, and let's copy it. And then once you're done, make sure that you update the user, because if you don't update the user, we're going to be getting some errors, right? So now here, this is the password. Let's just remove it, and then let's paste this one. Okay, and then let's save it. npm start. Up running on port undefined. Okay, I know what's going on here. It's saying that the port is undefined, right? So let's go back and check why it's saying that the port is undefined. So I say up.listen process.env.port. If that port is not available, then we are going to use 6000 console.log. I think everything here is saying that make sure you have the mongoose.connect. Yes, mongoose.connect process.environment.db, then console.log error. Okay, so let's just check. Let me check this out on Stack Overflow and see what's causing this error. Okay. I think I know what's going on here. So we are using .env, but we didn't install the package. Npm install .env, and then like this. Okay, so we need this package. If you don't use .env, this is supposed to require .env, because if you don't configure, if you don't use this package, we are going to get an error. Yeah, so let's just make sure that it's configured right. Then let's npm start like this. Okay, npm start server. Mongoose is saying that better authentication. I think it's because of the password issue. So let's go back and then let's check database access. Okay, database. Let's try to connect. Let's copy this. Let's go back and then let's change that. I think the username is Isheunesu. That's my name. And then the password, that's what we need right now. So if you go back to database access, you go back to Isheunesu here. And then what we need is the password, edit password. Let's auto generate it and let's copy it, and then let's make sure that we update the user, and then let's make sure that we just put it here. Okay, all right, so let's try to save. Okay, now you can see now it's saying that connected to DB. So there is one thing that I'm not understanding inside scripts. So inside scripts, make sure that it's start nodemon server.js like this. Okay, so now what we need to create a model, right? So in the model we need to create a model. So let's just call it user model.js. Okay, so to create mongoose schemas, what we need is we need a mongoose. We need to import it. We need to import this mongoose package, right? And then we need the user. Just going to name it user schema, right? It's equal to new. It's going to be mongoose dot schema. And then what do we need? With the username, which is going to be of type. Which is going to be type of string, and then required also is supposed to be true, because we will require the username. And then yes, we need to be unique, so we just say unique is also true, right? The next thing that we need is the user's email. So it's going to be type of string again. Required equals to true. Yeah, required required, and it also needs to be unique. Unique is also equal to true, like this. So the next thing that we need is the user's password. The password is going to be type string, and then required is also equal to true. Okay. All right. So now we have worked. Now we have worked on the user schema. So what we need to do now is to make sure that we need to transform the default MongoDB IDs. Right? So I'm just going to use transform, and then we are going to have a function. That function is going to take a MongoDB document, right, and a return type, right, and then we are going to return the user ID, which we need to replace the one from MongoDB, which is _ID to a toString, like this, right? So after we replace it with our default, after we set it, the user ID to the one from MongoDB, what now we need to do is we no longer need to show it on our API, so we're just going to delete the _ID, and we also need to delete the _v. Okay. So once we are done with our schema, what we need to do is we just need to export it, because we'll need to use it. Module.exports, which is equal to mongoose.model, which is the schema is going to be user, and then we need to pass in the user schema like this. Okay, basically what we're doing here. So here we imported mongoose, which allows us to create schemas. Schemas are more of like tables in MongoDB. The only difference is that MongoDB uses collections and documents. So we create a user schema, which we are going to set it to mongoose schema, and then we create the username. So this username is going to be of type string. It's going to be required, which is set to true, and also it's going to be unique. The same thing that we did for the email, and then for the password we set it to type of string, and then required to true. And then since this data from MongoDB, it has default IDs, right? So what we are doing, we are creating a function called transform. This function is going to take a document, a MongoDB document, and then the return function, and then we are going to make sure that we are going to set the user ID, our new variable user ID, to the _ID from the default, which is the default MongoDB ID. So once we set it to user ID, what we are just going to do is we are just going to delete it here, and then we are also going to delete the double underscore v, right? So now that we are done with this, we need to go inside our controller, right? So inside our controller, what I'm just going to do here is I'm just going to create the Auth Controller .js, and then I'm just going to create user controller .js. But before we continue with that, one thing that we need to take care of is the middleware, right? Because we are going to be working with JSON web token, right? So we are just going to create a middleware to verify tokens. So I'm just going to say verify token.js like this. Okay. So once I create this file, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to create a variable called JWT, which is just an abbreviation for JSON web token. So I'm just going to import that library that we installed, which is JSON auth token, like this, right? So now that I'm just going to create a variable called authenticate token, which we are going to use to authenticate the token, right? It's going to take in the request, the response, and the next, which is we use to pass him to move to the next middleware. Okay. Right. So here, what I'm just going to do is to get this token, we are going to get it from the auth header. So let me show you guys. So if I run my postman here, let me show you my postman. Okay, this is postman. We use postman for testing, for making, like, for testing endpoints and APIs, right? As you can see, I have it in the authorization here, which is the it's coming from the authorization header. As you can see here, we'll write it. It will come as bearer, and then the next variable here, which is, this is our token, right? It will be written like in Flutter. It will be written bearer, and then this token comes in, right? So what we need to do to extract it, right? I'm just going to say auth header is equal to request dot headers, because we are going to get it from the authorization. So we are going to get it from the authorization, right? So what I'm just going to say, if we have the auth header, right? If we have the auth header, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to say the token is equals to auth header, because it's coming from the authorization. It's coming from the authorization header, right? It's equals to auth header. It's equals to auth header, and also auth header dot split. So we are just going to split it, because we are going to be using a space, because I talked about the bearer token, and then we'll be writing bearer, and then it comes after the token, which I'll show you when we implement it in Flutter, right? So what we are going to do is use JWT, which is going to verify if our token is valid or not. So token, and then what we need is a process env dot JWT secret. Okay, so this JWT secret, we just need to pass it inside our env, right? So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to copy the variables that I created in my other project, right? So I'm just going to paste them here. So this is the secret key, and then this is the JWT secret, right? So that's the one we are accessing here, JWT secret. Okay. So once we get the JWT secret, right? What we get the JWT secret, what we need to do is we need to create an async function with the error and then the user, right? And then what we are going to do is we are just going to, if there is an error somehow, if there is an error, we need to show response.status 403, which the 403 just stands for invalid token, and then JSON, and then status, we're just going to set it to false, and then the message is going to be invalid token. Okay, so that we are done with the error, what we need to do is for the next one, we need to set the request. We need to set the request .user to the user variable, right? And then next, so this next is just going to exit this middleware and then move to the next middleware, right? So this was an if statement, right? So we created this if statement, right? That if we have an auth header, if somehow we don't have this auth header, that means that we don't have the token, right? What we need to do, if we don't have the token, we need to display status code 401, which is you are not authorized, right? So the status is going to be false, and then the message, okay, we need to just put them inside curly brackets, right? Status false, and then the message is going to be you are not authenticated, like this. Okay, so now that we are done with the verify token, now that we are done with the authenticate token, right? Now we need to use it to verify our token, right? So I'm just going to create another function called verify token, like this. So it's going to take in a request, a response, then the next function. Okay, so we are going to set again the auth header to the request dot headers dot authorization like this, right? So if we have the auth header like this, if we have the auth header, we're just going to create a token which is going to be auth header dot split. Auth header dot split, and then after we split it, we're just going to get the first variable, which is going to be our token, right? And then we are going to say jwt dot this is one in the same thing, right? So we have already done it at the top here. So what are we doing here? We are creating this variable to authenticate the token, right? Which is takes in the request, response, and then the next function. So what are we doing here? Creating this variable auth header, which is going to store the authorization from our API, right? This authorization, right, which we are going to access from the headers. So if this auth header is, if it's present, or if we have it, we are going to get a token which we are going to set to the auth header, or which we are going to set to the auth header dot split, and then we are going to use this first variable, right? And then after that, we are going to verify that token using the JWT, right? To verify that token, we need the token, and then we need the JWT secret, right? If we have an error, then we are going to show status code 403, which is going to be invalid token. And then after that, we are just going to set the request.user to our user from our MongoDB, and then we are going to move to the next part, right? If else somehow, that means that we don't have this authorization header here, then we are just going to show the user that he is not authenticated, right? So that was it for the middleware, right? So now the next thing that I'm just going to do is we need to just make sure that we export this function, right? So module.exports is equal to verify token, which we are going to use. what's the name of this? Okay, it's supposed to be with the authenticate token, right? So now that we are done with middleware, now we are going to move into inside our Auth Controller, right? So what I'm just going to do is I need to set the user which are from Mongo, which you are going to get from our models to models/user that we created, right? So now we also need JSON Web Token, JWT, which I'm just going to set to require JSON Web Token. Okay, JSON Web Token. If we go here, I think it must be this one, JSON Web Token. Yeah. Okay. It's need to be inside. And then another library that I forgot to install. We need bcrypt. But since we are going to be dealing with passwords, we need to encrypt passwords. So we need to install bcrypt. That's the package that we use for. That's the library that we use for encrypting passwords, right? Because you don't want to send a raw password to MongoDB. You don't want that password to be accessed by anyone, right? So that we might be able to protect the user's data. So I'm just going to type bcrypt, which is equal to bcrypt, right? So now we're just going to create a bunch of functions into .exports, which is equal to we need the one to create the function to create the user, which is an async function, which is going to take a request and a response, right, like this. So we need to use email regex. So the email regex, make sure that the user is going to type in a valid email, right? So this is the email regex. Okay, this is supposed to be a kill arrow like this, email regex. You can just copy it inside the repository, right? So now we're just going to check if the email does not match email regex dot test the request dot body was dot email, which is the email that is going to come from our user, right? So what we just need to do is we need to show a status code a response.status code 400. The status is going to be false, and then the message is going to be email is not valid. It's going to be the email is not valid. And then after that, the next thing that we need to do, is we need to set the minimum password to 8. So, and then we are going to say if request dot body dot password, if request dot body dot password is less than the minimum password length. So what we just need to do is so let's just copy this status code here, response to status code. Let's just paste it here, 400. And then let's make sure that password should be at least, and then plus the minimum password, and then we need to just say plus characters long. Okay, like this. So once the password is long, another thing that we need to do is we need to create a try-catch block. Right, inside our try-catch block, we need to create a variable called email exist. Which is going to be, which we are going to await the user.find one, with we just need to find one, which is going to be email, because we need to find the user by the email inside our MongoDB schema, which is request.body.email, like this, right? So once we have that variable, we need to check if that email exists. If that email exists, what we need to do is we need to return to make sure that, because this user is trying to create an account, so we need to tell the user that the email already exists. Right. So the status goes to false, and then message already exists. Okay, like this. And then what we need to do now is we need to create a variable called encrypted password. Encrypted password, which is await decrypt.hash, because we are going to be making sure that we are changing this password into a meaningless phrases, right? Request body dot password, and then we need to provide the number, right? So it's going to be 10. And then after that, what we need to do is we need to create a new user, which is go to user, which is coming from our model, right? The username will be equal to request.body.username, and then the email will be request.body.email, and then the password we must not set it to request.body.password, because if we set it to request.body.password, it's going to set the password that the user typed. So we need to use this encrypted password, right? So that it will be, after that, what we just need to do is we just need to await, and then we just need to save this new user. We just need to save this new user to save, like this, right? So now that we have saved it, we now know that it's successful. So we are just going to show the status code, response to status code 201, and then we're going to change it to JSON, right? And then we just make sure the status is equal to true, and then we just make sure that the message we're just going to say new user created successfully, like this. Okay, right. So now that we are done, if you still remember, we created a try catch block. So we just make sure that we need to catch this error. So if somehow we have an error, what we just need to do is we need to make sure that we show a response dot status, which is going to be 500. So 500 status code just means that we have a server error, right? And then status, and then it's going to be false, and then the message is going to be error dot message. All right. So now we are done with this. Now we're done with this function, right? So somehow I'm getting an error. Okay, it's supposed to be message like this, error.message, right? And then we need to create another function also. So this function is going to be login user. It's going to be an async function. It's going to take in a request and a response, and then it's going to we need to put a semicolon here. All right. So what do we need? We need so we also need an email regex. So let me just copy this condition here. And let me just come back and copy it here. So we have this email regex. So if this email regex, you can just search it on the internet, you'll get it. So if it's not email.regex, we are just going to show status code 400 that the user that the email is not valid. So you should always protect the user, because sometimes these users, they type in variables that are incomplete. So you just make sure it's your job as a developer to make sure that we protect the users from themselves. And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to set in the minimum password to 8. So if that minimum password is less than 8, that means that we'll tell the user that your password must be 8 characters long. And then what we need to do now is we need to use a try. We need a try catch block. Okay. The try catch block, and then we need to set the user, which is going to await user dot find one. So we're just going to find one user, and then we are just going to make sure that we find them by their email. But since, why are we using email? If you remember when we created if we indicated this user schema, we made sure that the email is unique. So that's why we are finding them by their email, because every user is going to have a unique email. So I hope it makes sense. Right. After that, what we need to make sure that if it's not user, that means that the user doesn't exist. What we are just going to do is we are just going to return a response.status 400, and then .json, and then status is goes to false. And then what we need to do is we need to make sure we tell the user a message that user is not found, right, like this, that the user is not found, right? And then below this, what we need to do is make sure that if it's the user, right, if it's the user, and then end, that's another condition, await bcrypt.compare. So bcrypt, what it does is going to compare our request.body.password. That is the password that the user entered, and the user that .password, that is the user that we use, that is the user password that is stored in our MongoDB, right? If all those things match, what we just need to do is we need to create a user token variable, a user token, which we are going to be, so let's go at the top there, and let's create a variable for JSON web token, JWT. We already have it, so let's come back here. So what we are going to say is JWT.sign. Okay, it's supposed to be an equal sign, JWT.sign. So we're just going to sign the ID, which is going to be user dot underscore ID from our MongoDB, and then we have the email, which is going to be user dot email. Right. So once we do that, what we need to do is after that is to make sure that process.env.jwt secret, if you don't know this variable that we created, jwt secret, and then we need to make sure that we pass in expires in, let's say 30 days. We want the token to expire after 30 days, right? But if something like a bank, if it's like a banking application, you just make sure that it's expired, let's say after 1 minute or some seconds, because we need this token to change. So, and then we are just going to pass in the password, because we don't want to show the password right to the user, so that's why it's equals to user dot doc, right? And then after that, what we need to do is response.status 201, and then we'll make sure that it's a JSON format, right? Then we pass in others, excluding the password, then we pass in the user token. Yeah, so we are going to just show everything else except the user token, right? And then since we use the catch block, we need to make sure that we catch the error. So let me just copy this, and then let me just paste it here. Let's change the status code to 500, and then here what we need to do is we need to pass in the status. We need to pass in the status to false, and then the message to error dot message. Alright, so now once we are done with this, we are done with the user authentication. We need to move on to the user model, right? But what were we doing here? So here we created two functions, right? We created the create user function that we are going to use for the user to just create a new account. And we created this email regex that is going to verify if the email is valid. If it's not valid, we are just going to show the user that your email is not valid. And then we created this variable for the minimum password. If the request.body.password, that is the password that the user enters is not equal to the minimum number, then we are just going to make sure we tell them that they need to make sure that their password meets the minimum number. And then we use a try catch block, right? And then we use the email exist function. So this email exist function is going to find the email from our MongoDB, right? Since each user has a unique email, that's why we are using the email. So if that email already exists, right, that means that account has already been created. We just tell the user that the email already exists. That means the account already exists, right? And then in this variable, what we are going to use a library called bcrypt to make sure that we encrypt the password, right? The password that the user enters, right? And then now we are creating a new user that we need to save to our MongoDB. And then we set the username to the request.body.username. That is the username that the user enters. And then we set the email to the request.body.email. That is the email that the user entered. And then we set the password to the encrypted password. That is the password here. Don't make the mistake of setting this password to request.body.password, because that password will not be encrypted, right? After that, what we do, then we save this new user, right? After we save this user, if it's successful, then we just need to tell the user that they've created a new account, right? If it's not, we just need to show them the error. We've done the same thing with the login user, right? We use the regex to make sure that the email is valid. If it's not valid, we tell the user, and then we use it also for the minimum password, right? And then we also find this user. We use to find this user, we just make sure that we find them by their email, which is unique, right? If it's not the user, that means that the email that the user types does not match the email in our MongoDB schema, or if it doesn't exist, then we'll just tell them that this user is not found, right? And then if that user exists, right, and if their password is equal to the password that is in our database, because we're going to use the bcrypt to compare the password, right? If that exists, then we are going to create this JWT token, and then we are going to sign it, right? We are going to sign it using the JWT.sign. We set the ID to the user ID, and then the email to the email, right? And then we set the secret key to the secret key in our .env, right? So once we do that, we then set the password and then the other variables in our user schema to the user._doc, and then we just return this response with status code 201 with the other variables excluding the password, because you don't want to return password as a response, because if you return a password as a response, that means that any hacker will just use those passwords, and it can also lead to the user's leakage. If there's an error, then we are just going to show the error. So after this, now we are just going to move on to the user model, and then we just make sure that we create the user controller, right? Okay guys, so now we need to move on to our user controller, right? So what we just need to do is we need to make sure that we initialize the user model that we created. So it's going to be require models/user model, right? So what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to create functions that we are going to export, right? So this function is going to be get user. So this function is going to get a user from the database, right? Specific user from the database, right? So it's we need the request and the response, right? So let's just create this arrow function, and then let's create a try catch block. So let's create this variable ID, which is going to be request dot params dot ID, right? Because this ID is going to come from the parameters, right? And then let's create this user. which is going to be await user dot we need to find this user by the ID, right? And then we need to set that to the ID, right? And then we need to create another variable which is password, and then double underscore v, and then we also need created at, and then we also need these dots user data, right? Which is going to be user dot underscore document, right? So what we are just going to do is we just need to show this response dot status with the information that we got from the database, right? Status 200, and then .json, right? And then we are just going to show this user data. So what we did here, we created 3 variables. We have the password, the double underscore v, and then created it, and then we have the user data, which we are going to set these variables to the values that are in our user schema. As you can see, we have the username, password, email, password, right? We also have this double underscore ID, right? And then this user data is the one that we are going to show. These other variables, the created double underscore v, and then the password, you don't need to show them, because if you're getting the user information, you don't need to expose the password, because if you expose the password, that means that you might end up exposing sensitive user data to attackers that may use it, right? So it's best practice that you don't really return the password. So if there's an error, we're going to just show response status cost 500, and then we're just going to show a JSON, and then make sure that the status is false, and then we make sure that the message is going to be error dot message, like this. Okay. Await constant users goes to user dot await. So this function is supposed to be an async function. I made a mistake here. It's supposed to be an asynchronous function, like this. That's why it was giving me an error when I used await, right? So the other method that we need to create is update user. So async function, right, with a request and then the response. Okay, so we need to make sure that we use a try catch block, and then we need to set the ID to request.parameters.id, request.params.id, like this. Okay, and then we need to make sure that set the user is close to await user dot find. We need to find by ID, and then we need to update the data, right? Then we pass in the ID. And then the next thing that we need to do is like we did previously, we need to set this variable, the password double underscore v, and then created it, and then the user data, which is we are going to set to user dot underscore doc, like this. Okay, so once we do that, I think what we can just do here is we need to just copy this, and then let me paste it that here, and then I think here what we can just do is there was no need to show the user data. What we can just do is status is equals to true, and then the message we are going to say that user updated successfully. Okay, like this. All right, so if we have an error, we just need to catch that error. So let's catch that error. So we are going to return a response to the status code. Let me copy this. Let me change this to 500, and then here the status is going to be false, and then the message is going to be error dot message, like this. Okay, so we are done with updating the user. The next thing that we need to do is we need to delete the user, right? And then it's going to be async request and then a response, like this, right? We're going to use a try-catch block, and then the ID is going to be request.parameters params.id, like this, and then we're just going to await user.find by ID, and then delete it, and then we're just going to pass in the ID. So if that user, we found that user, and then we can just return status code 200, and then we just need to pass in status, which is going to be true, and then the message is going to be user deleted successfully, like this. Okay, so after we are done with that, what we need to do is we need to catch the error, right? Error, like this. Then let me just paste it 500, and then the message is going to be error.message. Okay, now that we are done with the user controller, right? Now we can move on to the routes, right? So for the routes, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to create an auth route.js. So we need router, which you are going to get from Express. Since we are using the Express package to Express library to create our server, right? So, and then we need to set that router is equal to require Express, and then we need the Auth Controller. Which is going to be require controllers, and then Auth Controller, right, like this. So once we're done with this, we're going to say router.post. Since this is going to be a post method, right, then we're going to say register user, and then auth controller dot create user, right? And then I'm just going to say router dot post also. Which is going to be login user, right? Login user, and then it's going to be auth controller dot login user, right? Like this. And then we're just going to say module dot exports. This goes to router, like this, right? So we need to do the same thing for the user route, right? So we need to do the same thing for the user route. So what I'm just going to do is I'm basically going to copy this, and then I'm just going to create another file called user route.js, like this. And then here I'm just going to use user controller, right? We're going to set it to user controller, right? And then the other thing that we need is constant authenticate token. If you still remember this variable that we created, right? Authenticate token, we just go to require, and then we need to middleware, and then after middleware what we need is a verify token, like this. Okay, so here I'm just going to pass in ID, and then let's go to our middleware, and then let's make sure that authenticate token, let's make sure that it's the exact spelling, otherwise we are just going to get an error, right? So let me just paste it here. All right, so I'm going to say router to get, was we want to get, let's say, the user ID, the user information, right? So it's going to be slash and then ID, and then the reason why we created JSON web token, right, is because we don't want anyone to just access these routes. We want anyone who is logged into their account to access these routes, right? And then that's going to be get user, this. And then for the one for updating user, it's going to be router.put, right? So put method is used if you want to update the data, and then we pass in the ID, right? And then we need to authenticate the token, and then user controller dot update user, right? If we want to update the user, and then to delete the user, I'm going to say router dot delete, right? And then we pass in the ID, and then it's going to be authenticate token, and then user controller dot delete user, like this, right? So that we are done now with auth controller and the route controller and the user route, right? So what we need to do now is we need to go into our server.js, right? So inside our server.js, what we need to do is we need to initialize our auth route. Our auth route is going to require routes slash auth route, and then user route, which is going to require routes slash user route. Right now, below this middleware, what we need to do is we need to create another middleware, which is going to be app.use underscore API slash users, and then user route like this, and then we need to do the same, use and then slash API slash, and then it's going to be auth route like this. Okay, perfect. So now that everything is running on port 4000, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to test our API, right, using Postman. So if I open Postman, right, and then I go to body, right, and then if I put in my email and then the data inside my email, right, and then if I try to send it to port 4000, it should give us the data. So let's see what might be the problem. Yeah, it's slash API slash, and then let's go to user controller. Let's go to user route, auth route. It's login user with okay, it's login user. So let's go and change that to caps lock I, login user. If we go back to our, and then let's try to send it. So somehow still getting it here. Supposed to be login user. Okay. Slash API login user. So let's see. Supposed to be post request. Let's see on which port is running. It's running on port 4000. So why is it not working? That's the question. Why is it not working? Here, everything here is correct. So let's cancel. And then register user. So let's try register user. So let's just remove this, and then let's try. It says that an email already exists, so it's because I've created before I'd created some, which is okay, it's just showness 1000, right? So duplicate key, duplicate username. Okay, this was because the username already exists. So let's try this one. Yeah, you can see that user has been created successfully. So now the only problem that we're facing is our login user, which I don't know why it's not working. Let's try. Okay, I think it's because the password is wrong. So let's try. Now you can see, now we're getting this data. We're getting the ID, the username, the email. Okay, okay, the verification. So these are the other details that I used previously. So let's use the email that we created recently, which is this ms1000, okay, at gmail.com. Let's use this one. Yeah, you can see now we have the username, email, and then we have the user token, right? So let's try to like create a get request, right? So I'll just copy this here, and then I'll put it here, and then API slash users, and then I'll try where is it? Yeah, so let's copy this user ID here. Copy this user ID and let's paste it here. Okay, like this, right? So here it's supposed to be 4,000. Okay. So you can see, because not just because we are not authenticated, so it's telling us that we are not authenticated, right? So if I go here and then if I copy this token, let's copy this token, right? Let me go copy this token, and then you go to authorization. If I still remember, I talked about this authorization. We're going to be using the Bearer token, right? So I'm just going to paste it inside this Bearer token. If I send this data now, it must come back with okay, now this user ID is not valid, right? Because there was so if I try to send it with the Bearer token, it should come back with so API users. So let's go back and check what's going on here. Params. Let me cancel this. And let's try. Okay, the authorization Bearer token like this. Okay. So let's go to the user route. It's a get request, get user. This middleware is working. So there might be a problem with the user controller. I think there might be a problem with the user controller if we're trying to get the user. Let's see. So we're finding this user by ID, right? Then okay, I think what we need to do is headers, and then authorization. I think the authorization here is going to be a Bearer. Authorization is going to be Bearer, and then I think we may pass in this token. So let me cancel it, and then let me try to send the request again. So I think there might be an error with the token. So let me just check it out, and then I'll tell you guys what was causing this problem. Okay guys, so I figured out what was causing the error in our API. So if we go to Postman, right, let's go to Postman testing. We're trying to test this endpoint. If you still remember, this endpoint, we have secured it using the authenticate token, right? So that no one who is not authenticated is able to access it, right? So if we go back to our Postman, let's go to our Postman, and then let's try to send the request. You can see that the request is still running, and then it's not giving us an error or something. Alright, the reason being was that if we go into a middleware, right? Let's go into a middleware in the verify token, right? If we scroll to the verify JWT here, you can see that we made a typo here. We put a closing bracket, which was not supposed to be there, right? So this closing bracket is supposed to be here, right? So I made a typo. It's supposed to be here, right? So if we go back now to our Postman, And let's try to test our endpoint, right? If I try to test our endpoint now, you can see now that we are getting the data, because now what we are secure, we are secured. As you can see, this is the authorization, the bearer, and then the token. So let me just try to remove the authorization also from the authorization header, and then you can see it's telling us that you are not authenticated. But if we use basic auth, if we use the bearer token, which is our token that we put, you can see that now we are getting this. So that is it, guys, of building Node.js. So in the next video, we'll be implementing this API into our Flutter and making sure that we display information to the user. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.